Greetings, daddies and baddies. It's your friendly neighbourhood Chappers. I thought we'd have a conversation about amplifiers. I'm absolutely obsessed with amps. I love guitars, but to be honest with you, amplifiers, and tell me if I'm wrong in the comment section, but I think they're just a bit more exciting because the majority of the sound, the tone you're going to get from playing guitar comes from an amp. I wanted to tell you about my amp journey from when I started out, all the sort of the first three big purchases that I made, and how that informed my decisions when I ended up designed 4 amplifiers, 2 of which I can't talk about, unfortunately. But I'll talk about the decisions I made from my experiences with buying and really working with amplifiers as I went on. And then I'd love to hear your amplifier journey in the comment section. So tell me, what you bought. Do like a chronological thing. It'd be quite fun. Sort of diarize it. Like when you go home to your wife and then they tell you everything that happened in that day. Let's do that with amps. It might be fun. So I did the very normal, slightly nauseating, wow, it's blue, little grey boxes, analog amplifiers when I was a kid. The first sort of 2 or 3 amps that I had were just very boring, very normal, gain, switch, little push-in gain button and a treble, mid, bass. That was it. And everybody goes through those. I wish I'd have had the Katanas and HT5s, all that kind of stuff, but that wasn't the crack back in the late 80s, early 90s. But my first proper amplifier was a Marshall rack preamp. I talked about it in an Andertons video, so I won't go into too much detail about the first amp, but it was a Marshall rack preamp with 2 individual powered cabinets. And that was purely just the store trying really hard with my budget to find a thing that was workable. And what I learned from that was the difference between a preamp, a power amp, and a cab, which was huge, because when you understand that you can change each of those 3 components with a head and cab format, whether it's rack or whether it's a head with a built-in power amp, suddenly you start to isolate the sounds from the 3 different components, and it makes a big difference, especially when you get into mics. So that taught me a lot. I was like, what's a preamp? Well, it's the bit that makes the sound. What's a power amp? Well, it makes a bit more of the sound, but less. But it does this thing. If you make it loud, it does another thing. It was a whole learning process for me. Gigged that amp once with my band Devil's Jester when I was 17 with a rubber duck hanging from the end of my guitar, which was a gem, an Ibanez gem. Beautiful guitar. Anyway, next amp. I went to Canada, Toronto. I actually lived there for a couple of years, working with a singer called Mark Cassidy, who was working with Sony at the time, and he was writing music, needed a band. I flew over and joined and wrote and everything, and was there for a while. Actually got married for the first time in Toronto, and I personally bought my first ever amplifier in Toronto from Long and McQuaid. I will never forget the experience of walking into Long and McQuaid. It was the first time I'd gone into like a real guitar store in my life, and it was so exciting. The smell, trying all the amps. I actually had money, and I bought a PV Delta Blues combo. And this combo was so cool. I thought the vibrato was something I'd use all the time. Never used it. The reverb was just stunning. It had a channel switch. You could have gain or clean. Never used the clean. So what I learned was I don't really use a lot of features. I'm predominantly a crunch or a high gain guy with some reverb. I didn't want the vibrato. Anyway, I moved on from the PV Delta Blues. I flew back to England a couple of years later, and I ended up with Marshall VS265 2x12 combo. Now this thing was really cool. It was fairly lightweight. It was a little bit JVM-ish, before JVM came out. It had chorus and reverb built in, and it was like shit off a shovel, as we'd say in Angleterre. The gain structure was fantastic. The crunch was really crunchy. It had a clean, never used the clean. And it was portable. It wasn't quite loud enough for me. It didn't seem to cut through. And I never understood why, really, but it didn't. Anyway, got into a band called Hooker that was being managed by a gentleman called Steve Lee, who used to manage John Lee Hooker, hence the name. I mentioned this in a previous video, and he lent me his Mesa Boogie Studio 0.22. Now, this combo was the amplifier that I used solid for about 4 years. I loved it. It was so simple, so practical, heavy, very loud, extra gain switch, simple EQ, but everything did something. And I think I used that combo for, just the longest amount of time. And I tell you what, the number of times I put that amp on stage next to people that had, 4x12s, Marshall heads, orange, whatever. And they're like, is that what you're using? And I'm like, yeah, that's what I'm using. And they were like, isn't it a bit small? I'm like, no, trust me. Mic it up, crank it up, and it sounded like just unadulterated air sculpturing. That's what it was. It was an air sculpture. To quote Frank Zappa, because I just watched Rick Beato's interview with Dweezil. Hey, Dweez. And I love that Frank used to talk about air sculptures. Anyway, that boogie combo influenced me a lot in terms of practicality, simplicity, shaping of the midsection, because boogie seemed to have this thing where the midsection sits really nicely in the mix. And from there I went on and experimented with digital stuff and moved into orange and did the whole orange journey for a long time. Ended up with Victory. And now I actually currently don't have a contracted restrictive relationship with any brand. So I've kind of come full circle to I suppose, amplifier freedom. I can use, I can be, I don't have to be monogamous at the moment. When it came to designing signature amplifiers, for example, the Silverback, the RD1 with Victory, I was always thinking, what do I want it to sound a little bit like? And I think that was not a mistake. It's an inevitable consequence of having used things before. Oh, I want it to sound a bit like a Tiny Terror on steroids, or I want it to have the mid frequency of the Cornford Hellcat, which I loved. And obviously working with Martin Kidd, he designed that amplifier. Throw that in the mix, What I forgot was that it's really just about how you want it to sound. And as soon as you attach a sound to a name, you're not listening to the sound, you're hearing the name. Do you see what I mean? Like if I said, what's your favorite kind of amplifier head? A lot of you would say, oh, I like a JCM 800. But if you've never owned one and never tweaked it to your particular setting, you might be surprised. Might be a bit harsh for you. Might need smoothing out. You might need a particular microphone. You might need a particular cabinet. You might want to turn that cabinet and have an off-access mic angle. So it's much more about the sound you want, the air sculpture, and a lot less about what was the amp called, because that can lead you down a rabbit hole of just pain. Rabbit Hole of Pain is a band name up for grabs. If you fancy calling a band Rabbit Hole of Pain, please go ahead. Thanks. Anyway, that's my journey. I learned a lot from all those amplifiers. Each different kind of amplifier taught me something new. Taught me more what I didn't want than what I thought I did want, which was interesting. And overall, more volume, more better. Have a great day. Take it easy. Chappers out. Love you guys.